skeletons are out there. And my camaraderie to my right has indicated there's a skeleton crew today, but I'm sure anybody that's here has got an interest in what we're doing. What you see up on the screen right now is a new thing that we've put together that will run at the front of every meeting going forward, which is a little bit of A, if you haven't got the agenda, what the agenda is. B, where you can go to see past meetings and things that were presented at past meetings. And lastly, upcoming meetings. And so if I can, this board has wrestled with a lot of things for a while, but we are deep into looking at watershed by watershed and estuary by estuary, what it means between areas of the town's proposed sewering and areas that we would have to put innovative alternative systems in that operate at 10 milligrams per liter, which is the target from the Mass DEP. Caveat there is that there is no approved system at 10 milligrams per liter yet, although a couple of systems are closer. There's a system in New York, Long Island, that's coming along. And that's where we're at. So we are marching along here with Great Pond next. Peel Lombardo's going to come in and talk about his system, which has got a few installations that make 10. We're going to talk about Little Pond, Falmouth Harbor. Then we've got Oyster Pond, Steve. We're going to have Chuck Martinson talk about where we're at with aquaculture in November. And then as we get towards the end of November for this board, we keep trying to manage this very energetic group of you that will come back around to beyond having geoboundaries. What does it mean? If you put an IA in and then a sewer shows up, do you have to hook to the sewer or not? You know, all those different questions that have come up along the way. We'll work on in November, and probably, I don't think we'll get through it in one session, but between that and the second, the first week of December. My objective is to be able to go before, so this board's an advisory board to the selectmen. We've been interacting, John, thank you for your participation with the Board of Health to tell them what we're doing. But we are an advisory board to the selectmen. So we need to get to a point that we are ready as the year ends and we get into the first of the year to be able to say, we want to meet with the selectmen, we want to tell them what we've been doing, we want to give them advice, we want to make them make a request to the Board of Health and/or through town meeting, whatever they feel like they wish to do, to implement boundaries and conditions for people so that we can start cleaning up these estuaries, okay? Tom?
And I'll be coming back to this a couple of times before we go to the selectmen, but we have to be absolutely, totally clear about our process of setting the boundaries.
Right. There's got to be a whole
philosophy, the rationale, and we have to keep repeating it.
Yep.
It's not one and done.
I like to reference every once in a while that,
Yeah.
you know, a year ago, folks were saying, we should pass some resolution or make some motion that anybody from 1,000 feet of a water body shall do something. And I think we've made a lot of good sort of community collective effort, thanks to our phenomenal technical expert, to figure out whether for each estuary, what the limits are that will be necessary along with sewers and other things to get to a point where we can start to say we're reducing nitrogen to different estuaries, so.
Steve, this is gonna be on our website, I assume. This ought to be the first page of our website, because I can picture Falmouth TV mainly having their cameras trained on us and the people in the audience and the people at the lectern, and somebody at home looking at that for 5 seconds that it's up, frantically writing some of it down, and then it goes off the screen.
I mean, just work with Amy and get it thrown up there. So this will be from every 2 weeks. This graphic will get updated.
It's a great
So
idea.
This is a new graphic. It's It's intended to let everybody know where we are, where we think we're going, and where they can find information from our past meetings, because I really feel as we go forward with some of these IA boundary districts, there's gonna be a lot of, how did you get there and why? You know, I'll pick a random number out of my head, but it's 25 to 30% of the town is going to be inside a district that needs to put an IA in on their property in order to satisfy the state and comply with things. And, you know, while the state gives us 20 years to get there, developing a program, which we're just working on as hard as we can, is valuable. And as we get into the later November meetings and the early December meetings, talking about things like how do we get to creating subsidies, whether that's state legislation or not, how do we incentivize people to get in early, et cetera, et cetera. Those will be important meetings, so. Anybody else want to jump in on my pontification? All right. First item on the agenda, I recognize most of you out there, but not all of you. So if you're a special person and needs to be recognized, now's a good time to identify yourself. But I will like to call out that we have a new member of the Fourth Estate after a couple of years. Would you like to introduce yourself? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm Katie Nelson. I'm a reporter for the Enterprise. So you'll be seeing me around.
So if you come to our meetings and you're sitting here and there's a point that you want to be sure gets conveyed, she's a woman to be able to converse with, to keep things moving. Communication is important. Sir, gentlemen, just step up to the microphone because you have to.
My name is Arthur Gaines, 61 Haynes Avenue in Falmouth. Is this working?
I hope it's working.
Okay. all right.
I'm not in charge of it, though. How's
Okay.
that?
All right. And I'm here in response to this Falmouth Enterprise article, which mentions that this committee is planning a letter to DEP having to do with discharge limits or discharge specifications of
So I'm going to stop you
effluent.
momentarily. I always try to stay on topic, but because I think I know where you're going, does the board want to allow him to continue to converse?
Yeah.
Saxon, can we have a motion to allow him to speak? Okay, you're on.
Okay, thank you.
It's
And-
not on the agenda, so we need to cover that.
And I'll make this brief. I just want to make the point that in addition to a letter that recommends lowering the limits from 10 milligrams per liter to 3 milligrams per liter in connection with the Saxon project, I would encourage this letter to also address the frequency of reporting, because we have some experience with these large wastewater treatment plants that are serving a larger community. And I'm referring to the auto camp situation. And that's a very good system, and they are to be commended for installing it. And it can lower the discharge in the effluent to as little as 1 to 5 parts per million. And in fact, last June, the average level in discharge was 2.64 parts per million, milligrams per liter of dissolved inorganic nitrogen. But starting June 18th, there was a failure period in which the discharge rose up to 64 parts per million, from an average of 2.6 to an average of 64. And the reason it could be addressed is that they were required to monitor their discharge daily and report it to the Department of Health. If they hadn't, in the 4 days of failure, the amount of nitrogen delivered to the leaching field was the equivalent of 27 days of normal operation. So when in each day it was of that improper discharge, it was equivalent to 27 days if it had been discharging the appropriate amount of nitrogen. Apparently, the Board of Health has the power to assert how frequently the monitoring has to happen. And they've reduced that requirement now, according to my understanding. So instead of daily reporting, it's some longer period of time. The only reason that AutoCamp was able to correct the problem was that they knew from day to day, they watched this spike in the discharge. And if they didn't have a daily requirement for reporting, they would have missed what amounted to a large failure in their system. But they did catch it and they corrected it, and that's to their credit. But if DEP doesn't require frequent reporting of the effluent discharge, then they'll miss these kinds of failures. This isn't a potential failure, it was a real failure. And I'm just encouraging this committee to also, in addition to addressing the lower discharge requirement, that they also address the frequency of reporting of those results. And that's basically, everything I had to say today.
Thank you. A lot of what you've just covered is relevant to the Board of Health and this purview over that system. This board took a motion to ask the ZBA, the Board of Health, and the Board of Selectmen to tell the DEP, which will get oversight of the, so I'm gonna backtrack with you a little bit. The AutoCamp, so there's a state, inside Title V, state sanitary code, if the flow is under 10,000 gallons per day, it's regulated by the community's Board of Health. AutoCamp, when they came before the Board of Health, and I don't have this number, John, I don't remember, but it was like 9,500. So the Board of Health in Falmouth gets to regulate the AutoCamp, okay? If it's over 10,000, it gets regulated by the DEP under a groundwater discharge permit. So this board took a motion to advise the DEP, to advise the selectmen, the Board of Health, and the ZBA that they should notify the DEP that for the Saxon project, we didn't expect them to just, rubber stamp 18, 19, 20, whatever things, but to actually go to a much lower limit because they were in a nitrogen sensitive zone. So I appreciate you coming up and talking. I just wanted to be clear that your issue with the AutoCamp is inside the Board of Health. Okay?
I understand that
Okay.
it's directed to different groups, different people,
Yep.
because of legal distinctions.
Yep.
But it doesn't, that doesn't mean that it still isn't legitimate to be concerned about how frequently the discharge is monitored, regardless of.
But if you want, I've got the monitoring question. I'll talk to other people when I get a chance. But if you're concerned about monitoring at the AutoCamp,
No, he's using the AutoCamp as an example of what can go wrong. He's assuming our common sense realizes that if it can go wrong at 9,500 gallons, it could go wrong anywhere. It could go wrong at the wastewater treatment facility.
Okay.
And so he wants to make sure that since this one won't be under the Board of Health, will be under DEP, that they monitor it frequently enough that such an error is avoided.
Steve, can I clarify in a couple of words? What happened at the Board of Health last week is the AutoCamp came. If you send a nutrient sample to a lab, you don't get a number back for 2 or 3 weeks. And what they're doing is a self-testing kit. They have guaranteed to the Board of Health that in perpetuity, they will sample that system themselves with a kit 3 times a week. If the Board of Health allows them to reduce the samples that they have to send to the lab. By sampling 3 times a week internally, they can catch problems much faster than if they're doing the required sampling and sending to a lab which doesn't come back for 3 weeks.
Right.
So that's what the Board of Health did.
So-
They said, you can reduce the ones that go to the lab, but in perpetuity, you're going to commit to doing the internal monitoring 3 times a week.
And he's essentially
So
presumably
I'll say this.
wants the same
that-
thing for Saxon.
I will say this. This board will stay close with the Board of Health and the ZBA. And as Saxon's project goes forward, and at the appropriate time, as a groundwater discharge permit is subject to other inputs from others. So we'll keep our track of it, and as necessary, currently, I think on systems like this, they monitor them 4 times a year. Depending on the size, it's 12 times a year. Depending on other sizes, it's once a week. So we'll keep an eye on it for you, okay?
Okay. Can I leave you this letter that we sent to the Board of Health?
Yes, you may. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we don't typically have a public comment period, but it
Not gonna
appears that we
comment.
are going to now
I'm just
have
going to
it.
introduce myself. Hi, I'm Kathy Fox Alfano. I am the chair, or a former chair of the Bourne Wastewater Advisory Committee, and I am a candidate for state rep for the 3rd Barnstable. So I am here to listen, learn, and support. Thank you.
Welcome. All right, so everybody knows who's never been here before. We are out of here by 6:30, come hell or high water. Okay? First item is a discussion and vote to designate a liaison to explore the pathway to special legislation for the ISMC. So at the last meeting, we received a memo from Peter Johnson Staub, from his consultations and others about whether or not you could subsidize urine diversion or other things. Without going too far into that right now, there are contrary opinions as to whether or not the interpretation is or isn't correct. However, I would like to be able to have at least a person on this board who's the point on ongoing conversations with the town and others relative to whether we need special legislation or whether they've misinterpreted. So they reference an article that has to do with not funding Catholic schools with public money, which is a little bit of an odd stretch, but lawyers and others do their things, and that's where it is. Anyways, Steve has been close to a lot of this stuff with the IAs and whatnot. And I would accept a motion from somebody to designate Steve to continue to kind of stay on the point of what this is all about.
I will so move, having great faith in Steve's ability.
John Kaufman sent me an email and said he would also like to throw his hat for consideration for this liaisonship while he's on his glamorous vacation right now.
Okay, so we can have up to 2 people participate.
Okay.
Yes.
Steve, you okay with
Yes.
okay.
Can
So-
we rename it Special Acts Working Group? It can become a
anything-
working group.
I'm looking for a motion to.
Yeah,
to
I've
put on
already
the
made
floor.
the motion. I'll make the motion then that both candidates
Can
be
work together.
officially designated by this committee as members of the Special Legislation Working Group.
Second,
You got all that down?
Almost.
Almost? Is there any discussion about the 2 designees to try to figure out if we need special legislation or whether we need to get a different interpretation of the law?
Who's the
Are
other
we,
one? Who's the other one?
Jonathan wants to be
Oh,
allowed.
great. Oh, I didn't.
so are we responsible for any legal costs that they incur in their search?
They're not, we? Who's we? Wait, are you French?
Oui, oui.
Oui, oui. No,
There's a lavish expense account that comes with it.
yeah, $40,000 for furniture.
Yeah, I happen to know that Steve's tighter than two coats of paint.
So, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Say aye, aye, aye. Thank you, everybody. All right. And Steve and Jonathan, wherever you are, thank you guys for wanting to be official representatives of this committee to understand whether we need special legislation or not. And Kim, do you have anything to say to this?
No, I'm glad that you're pursuing this,
Okay,
and the Freshwater Pond Committee also.
similar stuff, yeah, figure out whether we need special, if we need special, we don't. I will offer you this. And I think this is one of your first things, Steve, as you and I talked the other day. The town of Wellfleet has received SRF funding. And that funding is being used to subsidize IA installations. So one of the first things is to figure out is, did Wellfleet have to get special legislation or not? And/or where are they at with all this? So thank you for being here. The big picture is, if Cape-wide, because we're in these nitrogen-sensitive zones and all this pressure to do things, we need to have some type of legislation. We have a number of legislatures and state senators across the Cape, and if we figure out what we've got to do, we get them together and say, we need this, get it through the legislature. And if we don't need it, because you can do it other ways, that's fine. But, you know, we're all working on this, and the clock is ticking, but, Steve, again, thank you for agreeing to do this. All right.
Okay. So,
We have more people trickling. Amy Lowell, the wastewater department. Everybody give a hand to Amy, who's doing yeoman work. Thank you, Amy.
And the late Paul Dreyer.
And Paul,
see what happens when you come late?
Paul, yeah. Planning board representative.
We good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, tonight's watershed for geo-boundary discussion is Green Pond. So on the right
Is it green because of all the algae that's growing in there from the nitrogen, or?
Green because
Probably.
of what it's gonna cost to clean it up.
Arr!
Wow. You guys go to the same.
We're working on it. Tag team here. You ready to go?
All right, so the image on the right is the full extent of the watershed. You can see it goes up almost to the town boundary, and it has its headwaters at Shumet Pond. The image in the center is the lower portion, the portion closest to the actual surface water.
Watershed.
So this watershed, there's about 1,457 parcels. 1,278 of them are single-family. Since the MEP finalization in 2005, there are 62 parcels that have been developed, so ones that were vacant. That does not include changes in use, renovations, it's just vacant parcels that have been developed. In this watershed, this is a fun one. We have some good special cases here. There are several freshwater resources. We have Mill Pond, which has 100% outflow to Green Pond and a 50% attenuation. We have a Shumet Pond at the headwaters, which has a small outflow to Bacchus Brook, and Bacchus Brook has its own attenuation. And then Bacchus Brook flows into Mill Pond with its own attenuation. So it kind of creates this domino effect of attenuation in the watershed that gets pretty complicated for how the loadings were calculated in the MEP. So that's fun fact number one we'll get to. Fun fact number two is this is one of a couple watersheds that are subjected to the legacy plume from Joint Base Cape Cod's wastewater treatment facility. So that plume is the gift that keeps on giving, and we'll talk about that too. So the data that was considered for this, the MEP report, the TMDL, SMAS long-term monitoring data, and from the commission. So the MEP has the watershed broken into two sub-embayments, Green Pond and Bacchus Brook. The MEP says about almost 4,500 kilograms needs to come from the Green Pond portion alone, and that there's no removal from Bacchus Brook. In the MEP, in the rainbow table, for those of you who are familiar with the MEP, it does account for the nitrogen plume from the base. But in the final summary tables, that number was excluded, whether intentionally or not, it's not identified in there. However, the TMDL report, which is produced by the state, and that's what's approved by the EPA, and that is the regulatory target, includes that nitrogen load, which is about another 500 kilograms. So the actual TMDL requirement is 4,949. And this is in pretty close agreement to what the Cape Cod Commission database says. The Cape Cod Commission doesn't break it down into sub-embayments, it just has it as one giant body. So, the water use. Again, we're using water use in the same manner that the MEP model was run to try and determine the nitrogen loading and or the equivalent nitrogen reduction. To be more conservative, we're using the lower average water use for a single-family home. In this case, that comes from the MVP database that says there's about 144 gallons per day is the average water use for a single-family home. So what that means is any single-family homes that get upgraded to an IA that's performing at 10 milligrams per liter would have a potential reduction of about 2.9 kilograms per year. If it's connected to sewer, you're looking at 4.7 kilograms. And for those parcels that already have IAs in there that are presumably performing at 19, it's about 1.1 kilogram. So factoring in the estimated reduction from the Acapesket portion of the T-Ticket Acapesket sewer project, as well as the sewer that would occur along 28 east of the TASA project, because if you're headed out to Wacoit with sewers, you're gonna be along 28, so there will be parcels to connect there. You end up with approximately 780 single-family residents that would need to upgrade to meet the TMDL. There are only 629 parcels remaining in that lower portion of the watershed, so you can't get there from here. Similar story using the MVP database. Again, this is just another way to look at similar data that's calculated in a similar manner, but at the end of the day, it's the TMDL that is what needs to be met. So here is the long-term data from the Pond Watch program. It has, the data that I have has the average of data prior to the MEP, and then it has a 10-year block average, and then we start to see the annual averages. The orange line is the threshold for the Sentinel station. That's where this data is from. This is from the GP4, that's the Sentinel station, and it's kind of midway in the estuary. So, the proposed geoboundary is pretty much every unsewered parcel within the watershed going up to and including what's in a Shumet pond. Now, that comes out to 928 parcels. 807 of them are single-family residents. So when I had the values for what you needed to meet the TMDL, that was for the Green Pond sub-embayment, which is pretty much everything south of 28, and Mill Pond, which right here is the line for the Mill Pond sub-embayment. So it's this very small section here. So that doesn't mean that if you remove nitrogen that's coming further upstream, that should, in theory, have a positive effect further downstream. This is what the IA lot screening size looks like. I broke it down into 3 sections. So we have the upper watershed. So this is a Shumet pond up here. You can see there's a bunch of small lots up there in the Shumet Valley neighborhood. This is the middle watershed. So here's Mill Pond. This is Bacchus Brook coming up here. So you see a lot of small lots up in here. And this is the lower watershed. I did not include the parcels that are part of TASA that would be sewered. You can see that there's a bunch of small parcels on the east side of the water as well. So if, with the combination of TASA and the sewer along Route 28, still about 2,200 kilograms through the TMDL that need to come out of the lower portion. If you upgrade all of the parcels in the lower portion, so that's all of these in blue and all of this in blue, you are only at 1,362. So you have nearly 900 kilograms still accounted for. Because of all of the compounding attenuation that happens between a Shumet Pond that then flows into Bacchus Brook, which attenuates things 30%, which then discharges into Mill Pond, which attenuates things a further 50%, all of those IAs in the upper watershed only get you about 260 kilograms of nitrogen reduction, being done in the same manner that the MEP did. So that's not such a great bang for your buck up there. Same manner with the MVP database. The one thing that I do not know about MVP is how they have handled the attenuation for the freshwater resources within the watersheds. That's a big question because there's no manual for that database. So one of the other alternative projects that the committee has piloted in Green Pond is work on Mill Pond. So one of the first alternatives that we piloted was harvesting the plants, which was all well and good, but if you leave the spigot on and you're still flooding it with nutrients, it's like cutting grass that you just keep fertilizing. You're just gonna keep going and going and not making any headway. So in 2021, we got permitted to install a detention pond in the cranberry bogs just north of the pond. In tandem with that, there's a graduate student from SMAST who was piloting the floating wood chip permeable reactive barrier bags. So the detention pond was created in 2021 with the remainder of funds that were allocated for that project and the first year of monitoring for those bags. So that graduate student's initial data indicated that those bags had a potential to reduce 20 to 35% of the nitrogen coming in. We do not have subsequent data on the detention pond because that needed at least a year to settle after creating it. And the town didn't have any more funds in that, and we didn't pursue it. But that graduate student is still working on that project as part of her dissertation, and she has not released those data yet. So she did a couple of years of monitoring, so we don't really know the impact of that detention pond on the system downstream. So to summarize, basically if you upgrade all of the unsewered parcels in that watershed, you're still not meeting the TMDL by your traditional technologies alone. If you consider your fertilizer and stormwater best management practice credits, that's about 400 kilograms. And there is aquaculture, there are shellfish areas identified by MES in there. Down near the inlet, there's some quahog area. And then just south of the Sentinel station, there's some oyster areas. But the potential for the shellfish, all of the collectively, is about another 430 kilograms. So the proposed IA district for Green Pond represents 100% of the unsewered parcels, whereas the sewered district is about 36% of the parcels within that watershed. So this is the full map. Again, the areas in dark green are the proposed and planned sewered areas that were identified in the 2019 CWMP update. The areas in the light blue are what it takes to get to the TMDL by considering just the IA upgrades, and not actually tallying in any of the other alternative credits. And then your running tally number, thank you, Ed, for pointing out that I missed a line in there, so it's right now. So at this point, we're at almost 4,500 parcels within all these light blue sections.
More to come.
Yep.
So my first reaction to this is sort of the first estuary we've run into. Might not be the second one, but the scale of what we have to do seems to beg that if we wind up getting an outfall and have additional sewer capacity or some spare sewer capacity to revisit what's going on here and figure out, because for those of you that are listening or following, you basically have to have 2 IAs to equal the nitrogen reduction of 1 Seward home, okay? So, yeah, wow.
And there are definitely areas that would benefit from sewering, like in the Mill Pond watershed,
Yeah,
where
I'm
sewering
not gonna
would.
try to pick any.
I know, but that would
I'm
be,
not gonna pick anything out right now, but it's just, go.
Well, that was gonna be my comment,
Jump in,
is
jump in.
based on what you've shown, it seems like this might be an area where you want to expand the sewer to the east side of the pond.
and this
rather
might not be a watershed where the Water Quality Management Committee recommends to the select board to institute geoboundaries initially.
than- Right, just expand
Well,
the sewer.
I would defer momentarily to when we get to the conversation in November about what the rules are. You know, if you put in an IA, because you're upgrading your home or doing whatever, then you have to put a sewer in or not. That's part of that conversation later.
And Mill Pond itself is quite impaired,
Right,
so. it'd be
but it's
nice-
doing a great service to Green Pond.
But I mean, I do remember driving by that when it wasn't full of, you know, new far or whatever's growing in there.
Yep.
Interesting. Steve?
I've got 4 questions. First one is, they're quick, if Kristen answers them quickly, which she probably will. If you use those extra things, then does it meet the TMDL?
You get very close to it, yes.
Close.
Okay. Number 2, why is it, if it's being fed from Ashumet Pond,
Schumann.
Ashumet Pond, why isn't whatever feeds into Ashumet Pond part of it? Is because all these layers of attenuation? They
So there
arbitrarily
is-
cut it off?
There is a value in the rainbow table of the MEP of 11% of what is going into a Shumet Pond as a whole, because it's 11% outflow to Green Pond, because a Shumet Pond feeds into Bourne's Pond, it feeds into Wacoit,
Feeds
it
multiple
feeds.
watersheds.
Right, so only 11% of what's coming into a Shumet Pond comes out into Green Pond.
And then
That
there's
was an
all the
MEP.
other
Feeds
attenuation as
multiple
well?
watersheds.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
And then, probably other people notice this too, but right down at the pond, you have sewers on the west side and AIs on the east side.
That's what I was saying.
That's like a setting for a range war. And especially if there were no subsidies for the IAs. It's just a graphic comparison where you can't say, oh, it's because they're close to the water or anything like that.
Right.
It's like a mirror image and you're doing 2 different things.
This is why we're digging down deep in, this is why we're
Right.
going through this exercise, find the inequalities.
And the last one is just for fun. If you, that graph you had of the nitrogen concentrations, could that peak be from COVID? More people in town?
Sure.
With a lot,
Sure,
It
it could be from a
also-
lot of things.
yeah, but.
It could be a
be
heavy
from anything.
drought, it could be a wet year, it could
Wet
be
year,
a lot
probably.
of environmental things driving that difference. So,
But it's consistently above 0.6 all the time in that watershed.
Yeah, no, I mean, it doesn't help us, it's just fun.
Okay.
But if we look at the
Time out,
different.
time out. You didn't have your hand up. Ed had his hand up,
Yeah,
okay?
sorry.
okay?
Yes.
Or maybe you had your hand up, I couldn't see it through John Waterbury's head. John,
Well,
can you tip your head back so I can see Tom? Ed has his hand up. I'm
Okay.
recognizing Ed.
I did not have my hand up.
Okay, so we're gonna go with Ed.
Okay,
All
we'll
right.
move back.
Robert's Rules of Order or something variant thereof,
Steve's rules.
Common courtesy.
unless you wanna yield to your colleague.
This, I'm sure I can get a quick answer on this one. It's just, not being that familiar with the area, but knowing how ugly Mill Pond is in plain English, are there active bogs or farming north of 28 in that area that,
oh, absolutely.
so there is a nitrogen.
All of this
Yeah,
is all bog, active bog.
active bogs that are getting fertilized
Yep.
and everything else. And that contribution is,
The contribution from the cranberry bogs is not as big as you may think in the MEP. There are actually, there's at least one golf course up here. The majority of the fertilizer is coming from the homes, as identified by the MEP. The bog is actually a small portion because they're under pretty strict requirements of what kind of fertilizers they can use and how often they apply under agriculture. So a lot less than the golf courses are applying.
So, you know, well, are you saying the golf course is a part of the problem too?
Oh, I'm sure it is.
So, you know, because of the narrow corridor we're looking at, it seems like this might be one to scratch our heads a little and say, is there a place here to also consider a PRB?
So I've talked about and looked at kind of in the bogs. There are some monitoring wells because of the eschewment plume. Again, that's 500 kilograms that's coming through for at least another 100 to 500 years is what the USGS estimates. But that plume is so deep. It's very deep. So to catch that
Hard to cut it off.
coming up here would be really costly.
I thought they were doing a pump and treat. Weren't they doing a pump and
No,
treat?
That does
VOCs.
nothing for nitrogen.
That was for the
VOCs.
TCE.
Yep.
So,
But,
yeah,
but I would say, make a side note, you know, that when we get into actually making plans, somebody, it's a reasonable thing to say, looking at the narrowness of this, Ed, are there any potential locations, where a PRB might have some value? And if that means taking borings or something at some point as we're developing the, watershed plans, I would not discourage somebody from spending short money to do some borings and look at the depth to groundwater and a couple of other things.
So there was also the floating
Yeah.
Right.
PRB in there that had potential, and we had, when we permitted this, we also had, I know last year she had a bunch of bags in the detention pond itself, but they also were allowed to have a granular alum in there contained within the bags so it could be removed. Again, we didn't get those data yet. We were told that they will share them with us, but she has not finished writing them up yet. And
So that
I
was
checked with
supposed to
her
be
in the spring.
phosphorus
Tom,
control.
you ready?
Sure. Kristen, back to the Green Pond Sentinel Station, time range of values. It should be pretty easy to look at our other south coastal embayments and see if there's any sense of synchrony in that pattern that we see there with that strange peak in 2021, and that's all I was gonna say there. It could be,
Yeah,
we
reasonable.
quickly find out. But I do think that COVID had an impact on groundwater levels and also on groundwater nitrogen concentrations, because we had so many people here year-round. Anyway, that's my only comment right now.
And I will kick back on you and tell you that in terms of water consumption,
Yes,
that you can't see a COVID spike.
Really?
You can't, yeah. There's an uptick, but not a spike. So water demand in the winter, which is the key thing, because obviously summer's whatever, that water demand in the winter runs between 2 and 3 million gallons a day. And everybody keeps talking about COVID and everybody like fleeing the city and coming here to their summer homes. But the numbers are very consistent over the COVID period from prior years for water pumped to the system, okay?
and you know why? This city clientele maintained their consumption of London Dry Gin.
And they buy bottled water.
Well, that's something I hadn't thought about.
And then
But
what?
Not in
that's a-
Falmouth.
Feed back into the bottles?
flush their toilet.
Yeah, keep
That's a
back
very
in mind.
good point.
I don't wanna say that there's
No,
not.
that's a good
I
point.
don't wanna say that there's not a COVID, people did come because of COVID, but the number and the effect of it is not as much as people wanna keep sort of pointing to.
Yeah.
And I just only go back to the water consumption,
Right.
okay?
And that's a good point.
One more question.
All right, John, I'm giving John has not had a chance to speak yet.
I'm silent.
You're good?
Yep.
That leaves
You had
Steve.
4 questions, how many more you got?
One. It's a request.
You're like Columbo, you'll have 5 more before
It's a
we're done.
request. If you're talking to the woman who's writing up the PRB, if you have persuasive powers with her, if you could suggest that she include data on what she thinks the residence time is in those bags.
She had that, I believe, in the initial pilot data. I would have to
But-
look.
If you're gonna talk with her, and I don't know who she is or where she is, but, it sounds like it would be fascinating if she had the ability to come here on some Wednesday night for 15 or 20 minutes and tell us what she did and what.
Practice defense? As her practice defense?
No, maybe it's a prank, but she's
After
working.
us, the defense will
She's
be
working on
easy.
something. I think we'd like to know what she
Okay.
did, what she saw, and
Yep.
what she would do different next time.
I'll reach out
Yeah,
to her.
That'd be great.
Okay.
All right, as always, this is great. We have a few more to go.
How many more?
Okay, go back to the slide that shows the next group of
It
meetings.
doesn't have all of them.
Ugh.
It's 1, 2, 3,
Here,
and Oyster
Ed,
Pond.
Ed, I'm gonna give you a paper copy of it, okay? All right,
And that will finish it.
Yes.
Okay.
okay.
See how handy that is?
November 9th. All right? Yeah, we went down the west coast, we've come across the south coast with some of the tougher ones. We got a little surprise on Bournes, and now we're gonna kind of tick off the smaller ones, but there might be a couple surprises in there too. We'll see what they are, okay? All right. Next item on the agenda is a discussion on the need for thank you. Well done, yeah. On the reevaluation of potential effectiveness of Bournes Pond Inlet widening. We have in our audience tonight one of my esteemed colleagues who wrote a letter to the editor questioning the Bourne Pond Inlet opening rationale. Tom asked for it to be put on to the agenda, so we will kick this around a little bit. But I will say this, the most recent person that looked at the Bournes Pond issue as part of the permitting to get all the permits for Bournes Pond is Ramsey. And we reached out to him, he was not available tonight, but we will have him in here at a future meeting to explain where things are at with all of that. So just, sort of the key thing is, there's nitrogen in Bournes Pond, and there's nitrogen in Vineyard Sound. And I would like to remind people, you've seen some of this slide before, which is when we looked at the proposed outfall location, and Mr. Jim Churchill did some work. He looked at background nitrogen concentrations in the sound, and he found that there was a variability from 150 to 280 micrograms per liter. And you don't have to read all this other thing, but the key thing is that first bullet, okay? For a range of that. The Center for Coastal Studies out of P-Town, they gathered data at a buoy known as NTKS subscript 10, which is located, for those of you that are in boats and know what you're doing, there is middle ground, apparently a good place to catch fluke if you know what you're doing. And their buoy is basically at the eastern edge of middle ground, between East Chop and Nopsk, if you wanted to draw a line, okay? Anyways, what I put up here is, and thank you, Ken, for helping me. Their information was all in micromoles. I went online and realized that there are people that are much more familiar with converting micromoles to micrograms. So Ken converted this for me, was it yesterday afternoon or this morning, whatever. So this is a graph that shows from 2010 to 2023, milligrams per liter of total nitrogen as measured in the sound at the NTKS station. We can all draw our own conclusion. There's some spikes in here. Don't know why there's a big spike in one year versus another. My eyeball says it's not a trend going up. It's just a trend that goes up and down, probably based upon temperature, rainfall, and a whole range of things that somebody could probably do a PhD thesis on.
And it's consistent with the number in your first slide, right?
And it's, yeah, that's the other thing, it's 150 to 2 something, okay? Yeah. So it's consistent. This may be the data that Jim used. I just had this other slide from when we looked at outfalls, and I didn't have access to Jim's data, but I was able to access this data fairly quickly, okay? So, just put it out there and we can have this discussion. Why widen Bourne's Pond Inlet? There are 3 reasons that we all have to keep in mind. And I acknowledge that it's taken so long to get the permits and construction costs have increased that it's a different number now than it was before in order to do the work. However, the bridge is aging out and it does need replacement, either at the width it's at now or at a wider width. It's not, it does not have 50 years of useful life, and it might have 10, probably doesn't have 20 based upon some data that was collected, okay? The second item is a lot of sand over time has washed into the inlet and has changed the dynamics of how that inlet works. And part of the project for Bourne's Pond, as it went forward, was not just widening it for nitrogen reduction, was also widening it, taking the bridge down and getting the barge in there and doing some needed dredging and getting that sand out and replenishing Minot Beach so that, you know, and it's not an insignificant amount of sand they're gonna move out and put back on the beach. The third thing is that it does improve tidal flushing. And it does reduce the need to sewer the lower portion of the pond. And this board has previously considered how to measure what we have now or what we're gonna have afterwards, and to figure out where the limits of putting sewers in on Bourne's Pond. I just wanted to walk you through that. And then the last thing, if I have it, I don't have it, the target is 0.65 in Bourne's Pond. Okay? So the Sentinel Station needs to get down to 0.65. And we just saw Green Pond, the Sentinel Station needs to get down to, was it 0.44?
0.454, I believe.
Yeah, 0.44. So Bourne's Pond needs to get down a little further.
You know, it's about
Green Pond needs to get down a little further than Bourne's Pond, but there's similar sort of numbers, okay?
down to about 4 times what it is in the Sound.
Thank you. I should have said that. I just wanted to frame where we're at, Ron, I'm not quite sure where you got your number from when you wrote your letter to the editor, but that's fine. I'm not challenging you at all. I just went back to where the numbers are out there and whether or not opening the inlet up brings cleaner water in and flushes dirtier water out. So I think we're still there.
Kristen, could I have the 2 graphs from 2 weeks ago when I expressed my concern? This, and I apologize for the quality of this, I just grabbed 2 images from the PowerPoint demonstration that Kristen gave, and I genuinely believe that that lower set of numbers that's credited to Pond Watch is bogus. There's no way out in Vineyard Sound, and remember, that says those are averages. Those aren't individual values. That says
I can't read those little tiny numbers.
it's total nitrogen averages, and
What's
the
this?
lowest one is 0.3, and the highest one is about 0.62 in the lower set. And as I said, I apologize. I did a real quick job of just capturing the 2 images. And this is why I was so concerned, because more than that, the Vineyard Sound data shows an annual trend upward. It shows an annual trend upward, and it also shows that the numbers, particularly in 2023, on average, were already higher than the goal that we're shooting for as a Sentinel Station. So I want someone to figure out why the Pond Watch data because that yellow spot in the lowermost right-hand image is where they are sampling supposedly. Why they've come up with those numbers that, to me, intuitively don't make sense. And that was,
Is it mean to say that the pond watchers are amateurs in the top graph?
No, I
is
don't think
professionals?
that's it.
no, Ken will
Because
tell
all they
you,
do is collect the sample, right? Then the samples are sent over to an EPA certified lab, actually, at the MBL for analysis. So I just think there might be a transcription error or something, you know, some units conversion issue or, yeah.
Amy has her.
I mean,
No, that's okay. Wait a second.
let me just add,
I just want to finish.
I can, no, that's all right. I think I can go ask the guy who runs these samples
right,
for the raw data, and we can figure out why.
that'd be great.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there a storage issue? I mean, how does it?
No, I
keep-
don't think it has to be, I'm sure it's just, you know, sometimes people forget decimal places, and who knows what the,
Okay, but anyway, that was my concern 2
I don't know where
weeks
this
ago.
graph
Well, you
actually
got
came
this,
from.
and that looks, so that's why I went, and dug back to find this one sampling station that's been collecting a lot of different data for a while.
Right.
Which a lot of people rely upon for Vineyard Sound, for Nantucket Sound.
Right, and it would well, let's put it in the context of 3 things that really concerned me. One was the time shift that it looked like we were seeing in the Vineyard Sound samples, the absolute value of the more recent Vineyard Sound samples, and the fact that they were all larger than what we were shooting for as a goal in Bourne's Pond.
Gotcha.
And so, as I said, that was the source of my concern. And as Ken said, probably he can talk to the analyst that's been running these samples at Ecosystems and maybe pretty quickly get to the answer for this. And I welcome Ron now if he's
I'm
got.
gonna let Amy had her hand up. Why don't
Oh,
you-
Amy, I'm sorry.
Go to the microphone, please, only because you don't, the people at home are fascinated.
Amy Lowell, wastewater superintendent. I was going to say the same thing, which was I can contact the SMAS folks who gave us this data and ask them to review it. I think, they send us, so I have this data and Kristen has the data, so, either one of us could give it to you, but I think that you could look at it more, and we can also ask SMAS to comment, look at it and comment on it.
And I would like to remind everybody on this board that back at the first of the year, I believe you all saw, I think we talked about monitoring for a while and what monitoring would look like, or before or after and everything. And there was a $100,000 proposal from our folks at SMAS to set up a monitoring program to look at it. I just sit here and there's multiple reasons for doing something with the Bourne's Pond Bridge at this time. It's reasonable to ask, did MEP's estimate of the value of widening the inlet, was it good or was it bad? And I think the proof's gonna be in the pudding when we actually widen it and measure it before and afterwards to figure out the extent to which we have to sewer down into Bourne's Pond. I think in the past, and correct me when I misspeak myself, I think we thought 34 or 40 homes might not have to be sewered in the lower end, which doesn't sound like a big number, but when you multiply it by the cost of sewers, everything else, it started to make sense to do a $5 million project, and I would offer that people multiply the numbers. It's might be getting a little bit on the marginal side, but it's probably still worthwhile because we gotta fix the bridge anyways. And we need to dredge this out and reestablish Mount Beach, or there's gonna be a bridge to no place down there. Other comments?
It's a shame that the $100,000 monitoring has to be such a significant fraction of the dollars you save with that number of sewers. I'm not saying it's half, but it's not 1%.
I've lost you. The monitoring, the cost of the bridge has now gone up into the $11 million range.
Well, you're right. Yeah,
Okay.
forget it.
Okay, I'm forgetting it, thank you. All right,
Steve, just
hold on, I'll get to you.
a quick aside. I mean, I look at this as a professional scientist, and I look at the historical record in the sound, and I'm reminded of the old adage, when visiting the zoo and standing in front of a cage labeled polar bear and you see a chicken, don't believe your eyes.
Thank you, John. That's been my sentiment from the beginning. But if it clucks like a chicken and lays eggs,
John, you just
it's
cracked
not
me.
a polar bear.
You just completely cracked me. I am,
All right.
that must be a saying in your family. I've never heard that before.
Let's see if Ron can top that. I move Ron.
Was it a Rhode Island Red or a Bantam? Ron, you're up. Have you ever heard that before? I've never heard that.
No.
Thank you. Ron Zweig from Precinct 1.
And past member of this board.
Yeah, and I was served on the board for 10 years, so happily and quite interesting. I take this off, I think. What I would like to mention, though, is that if you look at the MEP report from 2005, 2006 or 7, you'll find that in table 8, Roman numeral 8-5, it says that the nitrogen concentration in Bourne's Pond at that time was about 0.65 milligrams per liter nitrogen. But the threshold for the Sentinel threshold was 0.454. So that's the target, and the sound is about 0.7 now. So I don't know about your chicken and your elephant or whatever, but I know that if 0.7,
Rob, when you say the sound is 0.7, what is your source for that?
oh, that was this graph.
But not the data from the.
The data that.
So I put up a
that
graph earlier
Kirsten-
that was from the monitoring station at the end.
Yeah, in the
middle
sound,
ground, right?
exactly.
And it was not 0.7.
Yeah, well, it is, it's on, if you have the table, from the sound, it was about on what I could make out from it, it was above,
It was 0.15 to 0.2 on the data I put up, which is from the Nantucket sound buoy. I could go back and find it. This is the pond watchers.
Yeah, this is the spot.
Right, this is the pond watchers.
Right, this is the spot.
Okay.
And here's the data here, right? And this is 0.6 here. And this is 2023. So, I don't know what you're seeing.
So what would you like to do? Would you like to stop this project?
I'm just saying, maybe, it's not my decision, it's the Board of Selectmen's decision, but it's your advisory. You guys are the experts. I'm just somebody from the neighborhood here. But anyway, but if you look at that, if it's higher than the Sentinel threshold, then changing water isn't gonna do much for you. If the Sentinel threshold is correct from the MEP report, 0.454, which is below this, okay? And this is getting worse. But anyway, that's not my reason for coming. That was all in the letter, okay? It was sort of written up. You've all seen that. Maybe you've all seen that. But I think that it's great that Dr. Foreman and Dr. Waterbury are here, because there's another point I'd like to raise, if that's okay. And this has to do with the ocean outfall. And
No, you gotta stay on Bourne's Pond right now.
yeah, well, this has to do with Bourne's Pond, because the ocean outfall will affect the sound. Okay, so.
Okay.
So you have, I think according to what you've said, Mr. Rafferty, is that the target or the the plan is to have 1.7 million gallons a day discharge through the outfall.
The current estimate of the wastewater flow from the areas that the town has identified to be sewer is roughly 1.7.
Right, and we estimate if, with Amy's excellent management of the wastewater treatment plant, we would be getting 3 milligrams per liter of nitrogen in that effluent.
We consistently get 3 or less, yes.
Okay, so that amounts to 7.5 tons of nitrogen a year being discharged into the sound. 7.5 tons, if you do the math, the simple
Sure.
arithmetic, okay?
Sure, that's math.
So now, if you look at this, Little Pond, if Little Pond reaches its sentinel threshold, or the total maximum daily load, Little Pond on a yearly basis would discharge about 2 tons of nitrogen with meeting the TMDL. And the Green Pond, Great Pond, and Bourne's Pond would just discharge just over 12 tons of nitrogen a year with meeting the TMDL. And Wacoit Bay would discharge about 15.4 tons of nitrogen.
You're covering a large range right now, Ron.
No, I'm just saying what's being.
Then I'm gonna ask you, tell me how this relates
Okay,
back
okay,
to
what-
widening Bourne's Pond Inlet.
Okay, well, give me a moment. If I could,
Go ahead.
I can't explain it.
I'm gonna give you some leeway, but I
have
don't
to
see
give a
where you're
little
going.
background, but thank you for asking. I appreciate it. Okay, that totals about 20, almost 30 tons of nitrogen being discharged. And then in addition to that now, you're gonna have 7.5 tons, which an addition of 25% more nitrogen going into the sound than if everything was running according to the plan. Okay, that's 25% more. Now that, you guys
No,
have
no,
probably.
I'm gonna stop you. I'm gonna stop you right there. I don't agree with you, because if we sewer the ponds and reduce the amount of nitrogen going into the ponds
Yes,
from a number that is 25 or 35 or whatever is coming out through the septic systems, and we knock it down to 3, and now we come out the outfall, are we not reducing the outflow from each of those ponds?
yeah,
What you just did,
I
I'm
agree.
gonna stop you, because what you just did is you gave values from the MEP report of the outflow now before we sewer. And once we sewer, the outflow will be lower. So if you wanna talk about the lower outflow after we sewer, and then add to that the outflow from the outfall pipe, and then try to convince me that it's a bigger number, I'll listen to you, but you can't take the numbers in the MEP of what's flowing out now without sewers or IAs, and then go forward with it without calculating or including the fact that we have plans to put sewers and IAs in. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, thank you, Steve. Very, very well stated. Now, can I finish what I'm trying to say?
Finish.
Okay.
But don't add up numbers that don't
Now,
add
what
up.
I'm saying is that if the estuaries meet the TMDL, if they meet it,
When they meet it.
when they meet it, there's still gonna be a discharge into the sound.
Sure.
Now, what'll happen is when you add 7.5 more tons of nitrogen in the sound, the backflow will require a recalculation of how much nitrogen you need to remove, because more will be coming in than would be otherwise. It's assuming, I mean, all the calculations that were done were based on no outfall. Now we've added the outfall, or at least possibly. But if it happens, then you're gonna get, it's kind of like, we've looked at these different, when I was with you guys, we used to look at those other discharge points, right? North of, in the South Coast area, there were some other,
Stay on Board's Pond.
infiltration points.
Stay
I'm
on
trying to
Board's Pond.
explain it to you because you don't understand what I'm saying. At those points, when the discharge would go into some of those sites, then there was a calculation of additional nitrogen that would be coming from that discharge into those sites north of these estuaries. And that was factored in the calculation. So what I'm saying is that that's one option, one factor. The other factor is that the nitrogen coming in from the outflow pipe will be backflowing back in to some extent. And I don't know if that's been looked at.
So the answer is yes. So back when Mr. Churchill did extensive evaluation of a 3 milligram per liter outfall at the preferred location, and looked at the background levels of nitrogen in the sound, and looked at the increase in the nitrogen and what that would impact to, it was a very small fraction. And we looked at where, from the outfall, how hydrodynamics worked, and where things would or would not flow back into or out of any of the estuaries. So we looked at that. We did look at that.
Okay, well, I haven't seen a report on that or anything. I'm just saying that I
So
did a
at
calculation.
the start of this meeting, we posted up where our information is posted, and, Kristen, can you make an arrangement to see that Ron gets, the report from Ron Churchill?
Yep.
Relative to, I mean, we made some nice graphics showing the impact of nitrogen at the discharge point under various scenarios, but the reality was you can't even measure what we're doing.
No, I'm just saying, it's,
Okay.
right, but things have changed a lot out there. And that this is something, I don't know what I'll look at the
No,
report.
we'll get you
I'll
that
definitely look at the
information.
report, but it's
I
good to have
appreciate
it.
that you, I love being questioned. I love finding out if there's a question we haven't
just
considered or
said-
looked at.
Yeah, well, I haven't heard anyone on this committee say anything about that aspect at all, okay, around the question of the outfall pipe.
So
So-
I would say almost a year ago, we were looking at hydrodynamic modeling of the outfall and have went to town meeting to get money to do the next steps necessary to get an outfall.
Okay.
Which, as you rightly point out, if we use land-based locations, we weren't solving the problem, we're increasing the area to be sewered. And as I recall, you have oftentimes advocated that we shouldn't be building sewers, we should be doing something else. So keeping the area to be sewered down through the use of an outfall pipe as opposed to land-based discharge seems to me like consistent with your philosophy of life, I hope.
No, my main point here is, although you're assuming things about what I'm trying to talk about, is this point here.
Yeah.
How will that be affected by the outfall? That's the point. Okay, that's all? That's,
I will throw a wild number out that whatever's going on at that point will be affected less than 0.5%.
okay, well, you can throw it out.
No, you can
That's
read the
fine,
report.
but-
You
but
can
we
read the,
need- yeah,
you can
okay.
read the report,
Okay,
okay?
all right,
You can
great.
read the report.
Okay. I'm not here to be argumentative.
No,
I'm just pointing out
I'm
something.
working from facts
I
right
haven't
here.
seen anything like this.
I'm working from facts.
Maybe other people on the committee can explain it, but I don't know.
John, I think,
I'm
wants to.
gonna go to Tom, far end.
Okay, well, I'll say it then. If I remember right, Churchill's model had 100-meter square pixels,
Yes,
200 feet.
200 feet or 200 meters?
They were 200 feet in diameter.
In diameter, Ron, and at the 1.7 million gallon of
we
3
modeled two,
milligrams.
We modeled two.
Okay, but at that one, it was undetectable outside the first cell. It was undetectable. That's how quickly it's diluted. The other second point, which Steve alluded to, is Churchill's model showed very clearly that all of the motion was longitudinal. There was not even a hint of lateral movement towards the shoreline or towards Martha's Vineyard for the concern maybe of people that might be there. So all of that was very, very well documented, and that's why we're not concerned about what might be coming out of the Kite Park outfall.
Okay, well, it's great to hear that.
Yeah.
I just hope he's right.
Yeah, well,
Because.
he ran a bunch of different models that,
I'll look at the report.
okay, good.
It's a peer-reviewed model. It's been utilized numerous times for other things. At this point here, multiple people from the state have been involved and have put their eyes on the model, and, yeah, I have a lot of faith in it. Steve,
At the risk
Bail
of,
me out.
at the risk of prolonging this, in addition to trusting the modelers at Hui, there's a very simple, intuitive way that you can look at this. The outflow flow is 1.7 million gallons per day. The flow through Vineyard Sound is 17 million gallons a second.
You're all wet, Steve.
If you have any intuitive appreciation of
can you
fluid
compare
flow.
that to gallons per day? 17 times 60.
Per
times
furlong.
60 times 24. How many furlongs per fortnight is that?
It's gonna be undetectable.
There's a
And
there's a
unless the
lot of water flow.
concentration in the sound goes
Lot of
higher,
water
regardless of what's coming in, unless the concentration in the sound goes higher than what's in the estuaries, well, but that's the earlier discussion today of whether that's a fluke value or not,
I got you.
which, what they're looking into, the people that know this stuff.
Ron, stay up at the microphone if you want to refute. Go ahead. No,
No, I was just gonna say,
Just look at this. Just look at this.
Right, Ron, you keep pointing to this one graph. I put up there before a graph from another station in the sound that's got a slightly different set of values that show that it's below. So apparently where you sample, apparently where you sample.
Right next to the shore. You're talking 2 miles away.
So if you want to stay on Bourne's Pond, the closest sampling location to Bourne's Pond would indicate that we might not be getting the benefit we want from Bourne's Pond, but we're gonna widen the inlet anyways and figure out what we get or not get, because there's other reasons to do it. However, overall in the sound, because you wanted to go to the outfall and not stay at Bourne's Pond, the overall flow data from the sound and the sound values would indicate that the outfall is not a problem. Okay? You're up.
Kristen, can we pull up a photo of the outlet along the beach?
Do me a favor, only because you're on.
You pull that up?
Do me a favor, you're on mic, just say who you are and why, where you're from.
What do you mean by outlet on the beach?
Just along the coastal area, just the lower part. You can't, well, don't worry about that. Let me preface this by saying, it's a little late in the game.
No, you need to identify
Name
yourself.
and precinct.
Name and
It's a
precinct.
little late in the
He
game.
wants you to say who you are for.
Oh, I'm sorry, Paul Dreyer.
Thank you. I know you are, but I
Precinct
want you
2.
to say it.
I say it again, it's late in the game. Years ago, when Brian first presented this at a public hearing, I asked him if he could run another model. He said, "Why would you do that?" I said, "Well, you have a bridge that's 50 feet wide. It was planned at 100, and for cost reasons, went down to 50. If you look west of there, there was another outlet going out to the sea that was filled in about that time. What would be the scenario if you were to open up that one outlet and put a 50-foot bridge there? Would you get much better circulation, particularly since that's a kind of a closed area? You would not only save half the cost of the bridge, half the time of putting that road out of service." He said they couldn't do it. So I just raised that as a thought. Again, we're too far down the road to do that, but that would have been a potential option that might have emptied more flow out of the area and gotten better flushing. And he said they couldn't do it.
Well, thank you. I recall that coming up once before, Paul. And my response to that a little bit is, it's taken us 10 years to get the permits to do what we want to do. I can't imagine how long it would take to get the permits to create a second opening, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, okay? So,
That was my comments.
yeah. Ed?
I would just say, to try and close this thing out, we have recognized there's something strange about that pond watch data.
Yes.
Ken has offered to investigate that. It could be simple abuse of Avogadro's number when they went from micromoles to milligrams per liter. You know, science gets pretty deep. So he's gonna look at it and he'll get an answer, because the data doesn't meet the test of reasonableness. It doesn't make sense based on what other data on longer term has shown the nitrogen concentration in the sound. So I think we should put it to bed for now, and when Ken's had a chance to go back and have the raw data reviewed, then we'll know.
So I'm gonna backtrack a little bit, thank you. But we got a thing in front of us back last January from SMAS, and they said, round number, they would like to get around $100,000 to be able to do a certain amount of monitoring before and after, or during, or whatever, of the construction. And I will take it upon myself to bring it up through you, Amy, and Peter as necessary, to resurface that, to make sure that when the project finally goes forward, that we have, under $11 million, we should spend another $100,000 to get the right person on board, to collect the right data, and determine what the actual benefit is or is not from opening the inlet. But in the meantime, the bridge is failing, the channel's all filled with sand that needs to be cleaned up, so it is where it is.
See?
Hold on a second, I have somebody who's never spoken before. And again, like everybody else, you identify yourself, your precinct.
Good evening. I'm Ann Pride. I don't know my precinct. I live on Porns Pond. Okay, I'm not sure the precinct number. Don't tell my husband. He's a town meeting member.
You're an impacted,
I'm an impacted individual.
don't put your mouth on the microphone, just.
Questions. First of all, I came here to get the status of when this will happen. What is the status? What is the current status of this project?
This fall.
So I'm not the right person to completely answer this, because it's
Yep.
inside the DPW, but I will do my best.
Okay.
So a bunch of work was done, and a bunch of permits were applied for. And then, once all those permits were applied for and were received, then the town could apply to the Army Corps of Engineers for their permit. The Army Corps of Engineers went into hiatus through COVID and did nothing. The Army Corps of Engineers over the last 8 or 9 months has said, we're giving you permission to do it. But permits don't last forever. So a number, at least one, Amy, help me out here, at least one. Yeah, Amy and I are both shaking our heads, because it's inside the engineering department at the DPW. At least one, if not two permits, now require that they revisit if there's anything changed and reapply for those permits, because you can't go forward because the permits, don't, so, but we had hoped, or we had thought that we'd be going out to bid sort of now. My best guess from what I know, and I'm gonna tell you, go check in with a guy named Jim McLaughlin in engineering at the DPW. He probably knows more about the permit timeline than anybody that I know. Because he can tell you what permits are in and the review times and whatnot. But I'm looking at the fact that it'll probably be, I don't think anybody wants to do it during the summer. Unless they want to lose their job in Falmouth. Nobody wants to take a bridge out on that road in the summertime. So I think we've got a year's delay on it. That's my best guess.
Okay.
But I'm not, that's not official.
Okay, thank you. Next question. I'll be quick. I know we're trying to
Take
get
your
out of
time,
here.
Take your time. We're not near 6:30, and we're 6:30 we end. Pumpkin
So
time.
that $11 million number, where does that come from if you haven't gotten your bids yet?
You
You're
haven't
not,
gotten the bill?
No,
your bill, your bids, where does that
No,
11,
no,
where are you
again,
getting
I'll
11 million?
defer you back to Jim about where
Yeah.
it comes from. But we've had an engineer working on the project. The engineer did a cost estimate at one point. Nobody updated the cost estimate. Delays happened. The price of concrete, the price of this, so.
I'm in the construction.
I would like to believe that the recent number of 11 million is a factor of somebody going back to the design engineer and saying, give us a current cost estimate.
So recent, you think it's maybe a few months old?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
it's not multiple years old,
So sometime maybe this year or last year?
within the last 5 months. How's that?
Okay.
I just guess,
Okay.
guess.
No, because costs are increasing
Yeah.
dramatically, monthly, so
Costs increased dramatically over a 2-year period. They've recently started to level off.
a bit,
on the construction
but,
side.
yeah.
Yeah.
Still
They've
seeing 2
recently
to
started to level
3%
off.
a year on most of what I work
We could
with.
have a conversation about inflation and how it
Yeah.
shot up and came down and everything else.
So, okay, so, let's see. How many homes, including mine, 40, did I hear that number? 40 homes would not have to be sewered? How many homes would not need to be sewered? Yeah,
Well, if the inlet is modeled to reduce nitrogen by about 2,000 kilograms a year, and your average home is 4.5 kilograms per year, 44?
44.
okay, so let's call that $2 million, about $50,000 a system. I don't know if that's, I threw that number in there, okay? 40 homes is 2 million. Okay, so that's $2 million, all right? I'm just trying to make some numbers make sense here. 2 million versus 11 million. I know you said, you're talking about the other benefits, that bridge has to be replaced. I know you said that we could restore some of the beach in Minot. That ties to my next question. So I'm looking at the cost benefit there. We have other beaches in Minot that have been, in Falmouth, that have been restored and then washed away or eroded. I've seen photos that show that there have been projects like this, and within a couple of years, the beaches are again eroded. So yes, great, bring it out. build up the beaches, but really, we don't really know how long that's gonna last. That, you know, the coastal erosion we're dealing with is dramatic. So I don't think that should be weighed in as one of the considerations. That's my personal opinion.
So
Yeah.
your suggestion is step back from this project,
Mm-hmm.
hire an engineer to design a replacement bridge
Mm-hmm.
for a 50-foot wide inlet, and then extend the sewers down.
Yes,
Okay.
that's what I'm suggesting. I think that the cost, if you look at the cost benefit, that's much more effective than doing this for 40 homes. And quite frankly, we don't know what the storm surge effect is gonna be on those homes. You know,
I do believe, and I could be wrong,
I haven't seen
I
it.
do believe that the town's engineering department
Mm-hmm.
had an individual, a guy that we've asked to come talk
Mm-hmm.
to this board in the near future, look at storms and water and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe he doesn't know what he's doing, but I believe the town did look at that.
Yeah, well, if you, I would like to really see that. I never got to see that information.
I'm sure it's available somewhere.
And I'd like that person to come in over to our house during a storm, and they can sit in our house and with a stopwatch, see how fast it comes in now and make some estimates based on that. So that is obviously a concern, but I'm mainly looking at this, let's look at the cost. And also, we could introduce aquaculture in there and do a little bit more purging in there. One last question for water.
If we don't widen the inlet, there's no more purging.
Okay. One water quality issue. Why is fertilizing even allowed?
It's not allowed within 100 feet.
Okay, well,
Do you fertilize?
we need more
Do
enforcement.
you
Never,
fertilize?
never.
Your neighbors.
Yes.
If you see your neighbors fertilizing, call the harbor master. They're in charge of enforcement.
Really?
Yes,
I-
100 feet,
I have a feeling
100 feet.
okay, well,
There-
you
there's
should
a
see
town
how
bylaw.
green
Yeah,
it,
yeah, I'm saying this to the people that are watching.
for-
There's a town bylaw. You
just for
cannot
fun,
fertilize
drive
with
up and down my section of Bourne's Pond Road all the way up north and look at how green the lawns are right up to the water. So I just was wondering about that.
Then we have a bylaw.
Do
There's a bylaw, there's an agency designated to enforce it.
Yeah,
We have looked at,
that would just,
two communities went for home rule petitions with the
Yeah.
legislature and got no place because the lawn and garden folks beat them down over agricultural
I
exemptions.
think if there were
but
just
we're
a
gonna
few,
try it again.
I think it all would take is a few tickets being written and you would see some results because word would
Somebody's
get
got,
out.
somebody's got to drop a dime.
And money, that's money.
Somebody's got to drop a dime, please,
Yeah.
drop a dime.
What is the penalty?
There is none.
There
There is no penalty.
There's no
You know,
penalty?
it has to
There
have
is
teeth
no
in it.
penalty.
That would be a really good thing
No,
to work
there is
on
no
here because
penalty
you would
in
bring
the
in
bylaw.
money and it would also cut back nitrogen in the ponds. Anyway, you guys work hard. I appreciate it. Thank you.
We're gonna let Ron come back up. Ron,
Sorry.
Ron.
No, I heard something, I wasn't sure if I got it right, so I just like to check. Kristen, did you say it was 4.5 kilograms per house?
That's a generic estimate
Okay, and it's 2,000 kilograms?
for the
That's
inlet widening.
440 houses.
Did I do my math wrong?
Yeah, it's not 40, it's 440.
So at $50,000 a
Okay,
house.
440.
Except
Not in Falmouth right now. It is in Mashpee and Barnstable, but not in Falmouth.
Well, in 2014, when this study was done, the estimate at that time for Bourne's Pond was $70,000 a house. No, pardon me, $45,000 a house,
Okay,
45,000.
I can tell you, and I'll be really quick here, the Little Pond project was $20,600 per house. We were very lucky, the houses were on small lots, they're very close together, and Amy and I have been batting numbers around a while, but the TASA project might be 45, you think it's gonna be a lot more?
Don't put her on the spot. She
I
doesn't.
won't. She's
Design's
not-
ongoing, we don't have a final cost estimate.
Yeah, anyway, but I do know that the Mashpee number is $94,000 per house for the project they're halfway through now. The Barnstable projected cost is $124,000 per house.
You're talking about cost of sewering.
Yes, exactly. So when you talk about 400 houses times even just $50,000.
Tom, just to help out here, I do believe the cost numbers include the entire project. So in Falmouth, so I can help. In
Falmouth was an add-on.
In Falmouth, we separate building a wastewater plant or
Right,
pump
Mashpee's
stations
building-
from the sewers.
Right, and
And in the other communities you're quoting, They're just looking at the cost to put a system in.
Right.
Divided by the number of homes they're gonna sewer.
Right, it's
Okay.
not equivalent, but that's where the numbers are right
Then,
now.
but then what you need to come back to, and I'm not faulting you for anything you did, you gotta dig the next level down, and if you can find the time to do it, be able to say, okay, you know, Barnstable's gonna spend X dollars on wastewater treatment facilities, forest mains and pump stations, and then the remainder is the sewers.
Right.
And the homes, and then divide that by the number of homes they're gonna sewer, to get a comparable number, because in Falmouth, we never say, Amy, help me out, you're upgrading the wastewater plant right now for how much? 22, 24? 33.5, see? Escalation, there you go, cost escalation, right away. But anyways, we don't ever take that 33.5 and divide it by the number of homes being sewered to come up with the actual sewer cost. Maybe we should, it's just the way we've had the metric going for a while. And the other communities are using a slightly different metric to express the cost per homeowner.
Right,
Okay.
particularly in the case of Mashpee, they're starting from
Mashpee,
scratch.
Right.
Because they've got a very low number of houses they're adding the first 2 years and
I
got
just
a
was
big,
trying to-
brand-new shiny
I was trying to
plant.
clarify that if Mashpee's throwing out numbers over 100,000, or Barnstable throwing out numbers over 100,000, that, where that number comes from, okay? It's not, we spend a lot of money on pump stations and forest mains, wastewater treatment, lagoons, all of that, and then an outfall, if we're lucky.
Yep.
All right, we're at 6 o'clock, I'm gonna try to wrap this one up, if there's more on Bourne's Pond, like,
If we don't get it, I'll call it the downfall.
there you go. Anybody else on Bourne's Pond? Terrific. I think this is, so there's an application for nitrogen-sensitive area grant. Do you want to cover this quickly?
Yes, so there's an open call right now through the DEP. There's a program specifically to municipalities for nitrogen-sensitive areas. The goal of the program is basically to help fund planning to get to a watershed permit application. So Amy and I have talked about the call, and we're looking at two potential options. One being for that first watershed permit that the town filed its NOI for Little Pond and Great Pond, to identify any elements that might be missing from the CWMP and the TWMP to make that watershed permit application complete. One of the big things would be to determine the updated nitrogen load. So using more recent water use data and updating the loading from the time of the MEP. And the other one is we're basically rewording the grant application we put in for the 604 non-point source program, because we haven't heard back yet. They're not making their determination until late October, early November. So we're going to put in for a portion of that, because this program is a very, very short window. They're announcing awards in January, and you have to have your invoices submitted by June. So it's 5 months that you have for billable deliverables. So those are the two applications that we're looking at putting in.
Thank you to you and Amy for pulling this together on short notice. We continue to look at whatever grant money might be available and go after it. And it's interesting to see they give you a very short window to make a grant application, and then they have their timetable for review, and then they extend it and extend it and extend it. And then it takes a long time to find out if there's any grant money on it. So, thank you for putting that together. Okay? Moving on to item 5, we're looking good here. We might actually get through the entire thing. Reports of members and staff. Anything to report on monitoring the Little Pond?
Just plugging away.
Plug it away. Collecting data. Do you measure groundwater level at all?
Level, you mean the height of the groundwater
Yeah.
or the concentrations
yeah.
in the ground?
No, well,
We measure the
one of the
concentration
questions
twice
came
a
up,
year.
one of the questions that came up recently, that there's some observation wells, and is anybody looking at, as people are not using their sewers, the change in groundwater elevation on the peninsula?
Well, USGS had those, right?
They did them, I don't know if they're still monitoring.
Yeah, I thought they were still doing a little something. I'm not sure.
If you get a moment,
But,
if you get a
yeah,
moment,
I
check
don't,
in and maybe
I
we'll
don't
we'll
necessarily
figure
have
out how to
access to those.
pick up a
I
couple
think
more
they-
measurements.
They
okay?
keep them locked, right?
Yeah.
Keep them locked up, I believe. You
Yeah,
might,
we
usually.
might be able to figure out how to get in there, okay. Ed, SRBs, West Falmouth,
PRB's, kind of
British Beer Company?
trying to figure out how we're gonna get some funds and who could do some further investigation inland from Snug Harbor in the direction of the bike path to see what are the actual conditions in that groundwater, how deep and how much nitrogen is there, and is it feasible and cost-effective to put a PRB, hopefully along the bike path to intercept that. It depends on doing some research and doing some test holes and, kind of.
One small item I'll throw out at you, I recall when we went to put a water station in on the bike path, that a lot of the bike path turns out to still be under the control and jurisdiction of Mass Department of Transportation. And doing anything would require some form of lease agreement, okay? So you might wanna check with the engineering department at some point, what the rules are out there, so that if you're starting to think about putting that in the bike path, that you're aware that, of the way the
What
easement
the
will have
path
to
of
be created.
permitting would
Yeah,
be.
yeah, no big deal.
Yeah.
All right,
One other thing, I don't know, at some point you're gonna bring up the annual report.
oh, yeah, there's there any annual report, yeah, we'll cover that, we'll do that at the end, let's get through here and come back to that.
Yeah,
All
the
right.
other thing I would just ask is, John, are you going to talk about the Board of Health meeting and that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I won't mention that
Yeah,
because
thank you
he's
for
already
bringing
gonna
it
cover it.
on the
Yeah, okay.
Steve, if you wanna talk about your IA group, where they're at,
You mean the urine diversion?
you're in diversion, well, it's IA, right? You're in diversion.
Well,
Anything to report?
no.
Okay. Sean, how's the Board of Health?
The last meeting, two things came up. One is our letter went to them asking them to write to the selectmen regarding the nitrogen level that would go out from the large development on Sandwich Road, whose name I've forgotten.
Saxon.
Saxon.
Two X's or one X? I never know.
One X.
They agreed unanimously to forward that letter to the Board of Selectmen. So that was the first thing.
Good.
The second thing is we had quite a discussion about the next set of geoboundaries we sent down. And there's an article in the Enterprise, I think, coming out saying that the Board of Health expressed some uncertainty about the boundary limits. And that was directly due to my inability to explain what Kristen explains to us succinctly.
I would welcome the Board of Health questioning how we got to it, and
Maybe
would welcome
Kristen
the
should go to
opportunity.
the Board of Health.
Well, yeah, once we have them all done, we're gonna sit down, okay?
In any case, I don't think there's any uncertainty within the board about
The need.
the need to come on. They're working their way through. I simply was not able to explain succinctly how the numbers were arrived
Okay.
specifically.
So I would say this, check in with Scott McCann, and to the extent that you're willing to go to a Board of Health meeting on a Monday night, she can sit down and give the underlying process by which we're developing
And
this.
it's a generic process. It
It's-
doesn't
she's-
vary from
same one.
water, but,
We do it,
so,
yeah. So check with Scott, see if he wants to put it on the agenda and explain how we create geo-boundaries and identify that we're coming in with them as the year ends to the selectmen and then back to the Board of Health on an official basis. Okay? Thank you, John.
The only recent thing I did was spent all day today at a workshop on benthic data mapping at Webner. And it was funded, sponsored by NOAA. And it was, basic focus was how to use different types of benthic data to answer different types of management questions. It's oriented towards, it's one of a series of workshops they've been having oriented towards decision makers, and it's too early for me to summarize the outcome, but I hope 2 weeks from now to give you a 2 or 3 minute synopsis of what came out of it. They had a really good group of people together there, including people from NOAA headquarters in Silver Springs, and they're very interested in taking each one of the estuarine research reserves and making it a source of data for local decision makers.
How many are there around the United States?
23 or 4?
Yeah, 24, I would say. I don't know. I know there's at least 19.
I think there's at least 23 the last time I checked.
Yeah, they're probably, like everything
They
else,
keep
it's getting bigger.
adding.
But anyway, it was a very, very good workshop, and I'm hoping pretty soon to get some other summaries of stuff that came out of it. But I have my own notes in the handouts, and it was very well done.
I'm going to give a very brief report on anything having to do with the outfalls. Amy's doing a great job with our consultant, like continuing to communicate with people. We are at the point where recently the Army Corps of Engineers indicated that our application to do marine borings was complete with the exception of notifying the Narragansett tribe, which led me to, back to your 19 or 23 of these estuary things, to discover there's 357 federally recognized tribes and/or Alaskan entities. And so I do not know why we had to notify the Narragansett, but to the
But you
credit.
spammed all the rest to
but
be
to the-
safe.
No, but to the credit, I mean, we had done it, we notified the Aquino, we notified the Wampanoags of Mashpee. To the credit of our consultant, they got this thing around 10 in the morning. By 11, they had sent the notification to the Narragansett. When Amy was like, can you get that notice out there? They're like, here's a copy of the notice. So we are officially in the 60-day period by which they will then issue permission to us to do marine borings. Our consultant is contracted with an outfit out of New Jersey, and so it looks like we will get borings either mid to late December or very early January. I don't have a hard date, but on my timeline of everything that would happen for getting the outfall going and things that were going, I've got us 3 months ahead of my sort of optimistic schedule with all the hard work that everybody's done. And I know Amy works night and day trying to coordinate with all the entities out there and does a fabulous job. So, thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Really, thank you, okay?
What about, there was a USGS study on water.
All good, not peer reviewed, we can't officially say anything.
Okay.
All good, no problem.
I'm not
No
anticipating a problem, I'm
No,
just
no.
curious
Listen
how
to
it was
me, listen to me.
progressing.
It's not official, we can't say anything, there's no problem, okay? So, right now it's marine borings, we're past USGS, no official report. You can.
Okay, just one thing I would like to make mention of, I happened to see ZBA meeting on the 12th, and kudos to Scott McGann from the Board of Health. He made about a half-hour, 40-minute presentation to the ZBA about IAs, mentioned all the topics that are pertinent, put it in a very nice, concise, extremely well-presented form, and I think it's important because ZBA members get involved in this when they are permitting things, whether they're gonna require an IA. So, and they had some really good questions. It's worth spending a half hour, 40 minutes watching that portion of the meeting, but I think it's all part of educating the public and other town boards as to what this board's doing, and he specifically showed like the Wild Harbor geoboundary. It was very well done, and I commend him.
Getting the word out, okay. Quick thing, Jordan, who used to be on our board, is with the APCC, continues to do great work. The APCC, if you're not on their webpage, did announce that they got some funding for some project sites to do things. 2 of them are in Falmouth. One of them is not the big oyster pond, but the small oyster pond over in West Falmouth. And the other one is Red Brook, to do some salt marsh restoration, some former bog restoration and whatnot. So again, you know, the money's out there sometimes, different entities, and, you know, thanks to the APCC for running their program the way they do and getting some money for Falmouth, and hopefully we can continue to work with them. Okay, last item under reports of members and staff. This is the first time that it's fallen on my shoulders as chairman to do the annual report that goes into the November town meeting booklet, and it is due tomorrow. I'll do Friday.
Friday.
Do Friday. What day are we on? Okay? I've learned that in the past, among other things, Kristen wrote it and submitted it. I don't ever recall this board reviewing it and commenting on it. I'm gonna tell you that I have a very short window, okay? I would ask you, if you get a chance to read this, because you all have it in your inbox, I would ask you not to pick over what I would call nuances. I would ask you to read it for facts, okay? If you read this and you see something that you know is factually wrong, send me an email before the middle of the afternoon tomorrow, okay? And I will make sure to update it and correct it, because it needs to be in to Diane to get published, okay? But the organization of it is, we start about, we describe the committee, what we do, we raise the watershed permit planning, where we're at, and a lot of what we do overlaps to things like with Amy's department on watershed permit planning, or with the resource folks on aquaculture and everything else. I take no complete pride of authorship in this, because, you know, Tom, to his credit, I asked him if he would put it together. Tom put it together. Kristen made some
I
valuable,
think I built on Kristen's
whatever.
work, and then she.
And then
came
it got
back
to
and
me,
did-
it got to me yesterday, and I marked it up with a couple of nuances that I knew about. So, I don't want to sit here and discuss this with the committee, but I do ask you to read it, and again, give their assumption factually wrong.
I already read it, and it looks fine to me. If
That's good.
everybody else had done their homework, they could say the same thing.
Yeah, that's fine.
I would say the same thing. I did read it this afternoon, and it's fine with me, so you'll get no comments from me.
Okay. Ken, have you read it yet?
Well, I read it, and the red
Those are Ken's
marks are my comments, which were basically to move up a little bit,
They're in my accepted copy, okay?
so,
You're good.
I read it, no comments. The last word that's in red was the only typo I saw, which was
Don't do
singular.
typos. But this is, do you remember the thing about making carpets in the Muslim countries? They couldn't be perfect, because only God can be perfect, so they always
but
wove a mistake into the carpet.
nonetheless, if you find a typo, it should be corrected.
Can I point out one mistake then, right, in what Ken added, because,
Here, mark it up.
no, just.
Mark it up, mark it up.
Changed right now on the screen.
Mark it up.
But that's not Steve's copy. Steve's
I accepted
copy's
it,
there.
I accepted his comments, mark that up,
Oh, okay.
all right? Good. All right, let's move on, because we're
Just
getting
tell Kristen and
close to the witching hour. We have minutes of the prior meeting. Once again, Kristen gets out a nice draft, Tom makes minor edits, they look pretty good to me. Anybody have other comments?
I move we accept them as submitted.
Second.
I
Okay,
was not at the last meeting, so I abstained.
okay, you're gonna abstain on this vote. All those in favor of accepting the minutes as written? Aye. Okay, now we have another motion. I will entertain, and there can be no debate on this motion.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Oh, time out. Tom wants to have a comment.
No, I was voting in favor. That's my comment, yay.
Thank you. Good work, everybody.
Hand this to Steve.